Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on day 4 of PID Awareness Week. Today we are joined by Assistant Commissioner Peter Cotter and Commissioner Nina Johnson. Just before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping rules. We have the opportunity for you, the audience, to ask us questions today. There's a Q&A button that you'll see on the screen. If we don't get to the questions today, we will provide answers to those questions after the end of this week. And recordings of this session will be made available also. So just before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge country, and I recognise that I'm hosting this discussion from the country of the Gadigal people. I also recognise the traditional owners of the countries where you all work today and the First Nations people present in this session. I pay my respect to all elders, past and present, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their cultures and connections to the land and waters of New South Wales. Thank you. So I'm just going to introduce our guest speakers today. So first we have Assistant Commissioner Peter Cotter, APM, who is the Commander of Professional Standards Command at the New South Wales Police Force. Assistant Commissioner Peter Cotter is in his 40th year of policing, having joined the New South Wales Police Force in 1984. In 2013, Peter was promoted to Assistant Commissioner, taking on the role of Commander, Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command, where he led the Forensic Science and Code Electronic Investigative Response for the state for 5 years. In 2018, Peter was selected by the New South Wales Government to lead the New South Wales Crime Commission as Chief Executive and Commissioner, which he did for 2 years. In early 2024, Peter assumed command of the Professional Standards Command, where he leads the team in setting and embedding the professional standards for performance, conduct and integrity across the New South Wales Police Force, focusing strongly on the prevention, disruption and response to serious misconduct and maladministration. Peter holds an Associate Diploma in Criminal Justice and a Bachelor of Law degrees with honours, as well as postgraduate law qualifications, and is admitted as a legal practitioner in New South Wales for over 30 years. In the Australia Day Honours of 2008, Peter was awarded the Australian Police Medal for Distinguished Service. Thank you for joining us, Peter.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Nina Johnson from the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission has also joined us today. Nina has degrees in Law and Sociology from Murdoch University and a Masters in Research in Law from the Australian National University, which she completed with the help of a Lionel Murphy Scholarship. She was appointed as Commissioner of the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission in May 2022. From 2012 to 2022, Anina held the position of Deputy President Forensic at the New South Wales Mental Health Review Tribunal, where she sat in both forensic and civil divisions of the tribunal. She was also involved in strategic issues in relation to forensic mental health, including significant legislative reform. Prior to her appointment to the tribunal, Anina was a senior solicitor and solicitor advocate in the New South Wales Crown Solicitor's Office for 12 years, where she appeared in complex matters before a range of courts and tribunals. She acted as counsel assisting the Administrative Decisions Tribunal and the coroner. Anina is an adjunct associate professor with the University of New South Wales and has published and presented in the areas of mental health, criminal law and administrative law. Welcome, Anina.
Thank you.
Right, so both our guests have some opening remarks that they make about the topic today, and then we'll just lead into some questions and some conversation around that. So, Assistant Commissioner Cotter.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise. Absolute pleasure to be here. Good morning, Anina, and good morning everyone online and who might watch this at a later time. As Louise said, Peter Cotter, Assistant Commissioner, and in charge of professional standards for the New South Wales Police Force, and what a beast that is at times. To set the scene, which is very different to many other organisations and public service agencies, it's probably pertinent to know that, to reinforce a few things, that we have a statewide mandate and responsibility which covers 800,000 square kilometres of this magnificent state. You know, from the sea through the trees and even into the ski fields and beyond. There's 8 million people to look after, and that's what we do first and foremost, is look after them, but obviously there's a small percentage of them that we have to police. There's 5 million people in this magic city of Sydney and the surrounds, and 3 million regionally. And of course, we have to distribute our police across that landscape. We have 21,000 employees, 17,000 of them are sworn members, and 4,000 administrative or non-sworn civilians, who all do a range of amazing jobs, from clearly leadership all the way down to specialist practitioner roles, and whether that be in the water, on land or in the sky. We are spread across hundreds of police stations, and I emphasise that because a lot of the agencies that you might represent are all maybe 30 people, 150 people, all under the one roof or 2 floors of a building. When it comes to internal responsibility and setting standards and codes and culture across 21,000 people who are spread and far-flung, you can just understand very quickly the challenges with that. We are also a place which, unlike others, we recruit 1,000 people a year, but we also lose 1,000 people a year through various forms of attrition, whether that be through discharge, whether that be through sackings on occasions, sick leave, retirements, people just going and getting other jobs. So again, another real impediment to the culture of the place. Yes, it's good to have a tide in and out of a place, but again, with 1,000 leaving and 1,000 coming, you're continually retraining, you're continually building and instilling the positive cultures and trying to erode some of the negative ones. We have a demographic from 19 years of age, which is the mandatory age to join the police, just lowered actually to 18. But we have people well and truly in their 70s, again, and we cover men and women of all types of diversity, sexuality, religion, cultural background, and of course, many of us are very career focused, and others maybe not so, but they still do an amazing job, but they might not want to get the tertiary qualifications or improve themselves. So I set that scene as it's a really challenging landscape and people group to build the one culture on. And we are one of the oldest companies in Australia, 160 years old, incorporated. From a police complaints perspective, we would get about 5,000 complaints a year, and that's been consistent probably over the last at least 10 years. The majority of them, and I'm talking, the 70%, are around customer service stuff. Perhaps we're not at our best when we pull someone over. Sometimes that rudeness might get in the way. Of course, we have many challenging members of the community also who challenge us, and sometimes we're not always at our best with that sort of stuff. So that's not great, but it's also not woeful either, in that when I'm talking that 80% of our 5,000 complaints are around that customer service stuff. Of those 5,000 complaints, 1,500 or so are internally generated. In other words, there's 1,500 people who are observing behaviour in the workplace, which is, about 30% of all our complaints. So that is a really good cultural piece, I think, who are saying that behaviour, whether it be minor all the way up to major and potentially criminal, is not acceptable. And they report it. And of course, all police, no matter what rank you are, have a statutory obligation under the Police Act to report suspected misconduct of an officer. And your job is very simply to report it to your next line of command, to a senior officer, who then either you can commit it to writing, or alternatively someone on your behalf commits it to writing. But that must occur, must be in writing. And from there the complaint becomes a live issue and progresses. And of course, we have a decentralised model. Yes, whilst professional standards is a couple of hundred people, we can't do every complaint. So we have a decentralised model. The local areas where the complaint comes in will receive it, assess it, review it, triage it, identify the issues that flow from it, whether they be criminal or misconduct, and then they'll allocate an investigator, quite often a detective, depending on the gravity of what it is, and then it'll progress. And we have a time frame. We're very strict on our time frames. We have a 90-day turnaround time. And on 80% of our occasions, for year in, year out, we meet that, which is a pretty good benchmark, I think. The Professional Standards Command, we have an overarching role in that we are sort of like the specialists. So we won't do the more menial type complaints. We will do the major end, big end of town complaints. So ones where there's obviously significant criminality, some type of recidivist behaviour, very sexualised behaviour, things that have attracted media attention or we just know are going to be sensitive. At the same time we do all that, we upload all our complaints to our misconduct management system, which the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission have absolute visibility over and monitor. There's also a certain threshold of investigation or complaint that is a mandatory requirement, depending on perhaps the person's rank or the gravity of the issue raised. And equally, LECC, in their oversight capacity, have the ability to monitor those jobs and say that one is of interest to it. It might link in with a thematic or something else they're doing with a similar station or a peer station or that same person again. So they have the capacity to jump in and out of that system as well and pick and choose to a degree. One of the big things and how you build culture around good complaint management, which leads to how do you give confidence to people to come forward to complain, is consistency and quality of investigation. We must have consistent methods when it comes in the initial gateway to triage it. We must have consistency in our investigation. We must have consistency in our outcomes and findings, and we must have consistency in the penalties that we deliver and the sanctions, whether they be internal, excuse me, or otherwise. Because there's nothing will divide a workforce more than an inconsistent model of complaint management, along the lines of favouritism or nepotism shown to some people, or a blind eye to that person plays golf with the boss, for example, versus, oh, they're in the surf club together, all those sorts of things. And bearing in mind that one of the challenges is always that we also police country town police officers and stations, and those people literally do work together, play together, stay together, on and off duty. And particularly the more remoter it is, obviously you can understand the more divisive it can be when a complaint is raised, and the courage needed to raise such a complaint. If we talk about internal police witnesses now, somewhat the core of today or this week's theme is, notwithstanding a statutory obligation to report, you still need courage. Courage is like leadership, and you won't have leadership without courage. And clearly, you must have courage to be that leader and stand up, speak up, and talk about what you've seen. It's also integral for the leaders to exhibit leadership and set a climate or a platform where people feel that they can come forward, not have retribution against them, but feel comforted, feel believed, but also informed of the reality. Let's strip it back. If you are being a whistleblower, if you are publicly disclosing or internally disclosing issues that you see, particularly really significant ones, you've got to understand the reality of that there's a journey in front of you. You have a testimony and a story to tell. We need to take that, the investigators need to take that, like they would from any other witness in a criminal matter or anything that we do. We need to have it in written testimony. We need to gather that physical evidence, whether it be from a body-worn camera, whether it be external from CCTV imagery or the like. and also interview, perhaps other people in the community. So it's treated as a very, very serious investigation. And I think people who do disclose and do become internal witnesses, that has to be explained to them up front. Not in a way that obviously scares them out of it, but in a way that coaches them and coaxes them into it. We have to instill in our people that it will be treated confidentially, but understanding that in high-end matters equally that end up in perhaps Law Enforcement Conduct Commission hearings, that end up in industrial relations tribunals, or ultimately end up in the criminal court, there is no place to be essentially anonymous there. So this is sometimes the stuff that's not spoken about when we talk about the reality of what an internal witness is. But again, we do it in a way through leadership and through building that positive culture that you will be respected and you will be treated absolutely fairly. But there is also, obviously a burden to becoming a witness in the workplace. But we are very good at also putting support mechanisms around people. We have a raft of chaplains, internal welfare programs, health checks, psych checks. There's probably no other agency in New South Wales government, if not perhaps even the Commonwealth, I would dare say, that probably has as many junctions and people that can help you in that managing that stuff. But as I said, being a witness is not just a one-off, give your testimony, and then it goes away. Understanding that it can impact you as the individual reporting, very emotionally. It can manifest into physical ailments sometimes. It can impact your family, and I'm not going to lie, it can impact your career. Not in a retribution way so much, not that there's going to be complaints about you, but things do change. The reality is, being an internal witness does change things forevermore. But it's our job as leaders and managers and senior managers and an organisation to respect all of that and make sure that there is never any detrimental action. And we do that. Many witnesses opt for our internal witness support unit, which is a dedicated team which sits under me through an inspector, senior sergeants, a number of sergeants, and effectively they become case officers for the high-end witness. They are experts in their field, and understanding that in a whole lot of our other police business, we are very good at managing police informants and keeping them safe through a whole lot of range of programs. It's not as intense as that program, clearly, but the bones of that give us the experience to be able to deal with people who come forward. And it is about obtaining that testimony, but it's more welfare-based, and it is about literally protection and sometimes hand-holding through those points, such as hearings, such as giving testimonies, such as appearance at tribunals and the like. But of course we keep it as covert and as confidential for as long as we can. And some of those very initial meetings are off-site at police stations. Obviously, we're not going to set up a tent in the middle of a police station and start talking to internal witnesses. We do it in a surreptitious way, and we're very experienced at it. And we have 110 current cases on our books at the moment at various stages of witnesses in the system. Some of them heavily involved in criminal matters as witnesses against police, and equally some of them just more, the lower end of misconduct matters. And they're registered. It's a proper program, like you would register any informant or that. So they're registered. There's contact meetings recorded in secure databases, and of course at the end and the completion of the matter, whether that be 3 months or 3 years, they're deregistered. As I said, their welfare during and post is something that we treat so seriously. Some of the top trending areas at the moment in policing, unfortunately, and it sometimes shames me to say it, is that sexual-based behaviour in the workplace, sometimes manifesting outside the workplace. We have a very zero tolerance to that, and not just because we've got a female commissioner, but through leadership from I think many men, and myself included in that. The zero tolerance is like we might sack 3 to 4 people a month under 181D of the Police Act. Clearly, when we talk about how we set up a speak up culture, we have a theme: see it, say it, stop it. We start in the embryonic stages with our students at the Academy at Goulburn. We'll go down there and lecture them on presentations about misconduct and their duty, not only their statutory obligation, but it's the right thing to do to come forward. And then, of course, at all various programs, leadership programs, whether they be in-house or sort of on our more major leadership programs, it's reinforced around the welfare of witnesses and obviously misconduct interruption. Publications, monthly articles in our internal magazines, videos, screensavers, posters, all those general mediums to articulate. But I'll leave you with this, that leadership in this space is critical. It's one thing to talk it, it's one thing to put posters up about it, but actions speak so much louder, and it is incumbent upon every leader in this organisation to instil a climate and a culture where people can come forward, are going to be believed, can remain as covert and as confidential for as long as possible, depending on where it ends up, and are protected. And it's those actions which then lead to the ethos for the next person to come forward, because they know that that witness was treated well and came out of it with the best possible outcome.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your insight into, I guess, having support for reporters and building a speak-up culture in such a large organisation. Commissioner Johnson.
Thanks, Louise. I was thinking again about PID Awareness Week, and conscious that our experience in this area is in relation to the diversity of the policing culture, and police have a very particular and challenging culture to build a speak-up culture, partly because inherent in policing is we ask police to run towards danger. If you think about when we call police, it's the things we are worried about as individuals, and so we ask police to come in and help us out with that. But as a result, police need to therefore feel confidence and trust that not only are they running towards danger, but that the people running beside them also are people that they can trust and have confidence. Traditionally, I think that's happened through a kind of a really tight-knit policing community. It's happened through a really tight-knit culture, the corollary of which is you don't dob on your mates. So it's really challenging to shift that culture for the police, I think, from one which says, I trust you because I know you've got integrity, and if you don't, the right thing for me to do is to speak up about that. So it's a shifting mindset. I just wanted to reflect a bit on two sort of examples that have come up over the 30 years, I guess, of the existence of the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission and its predecessor agencies. The LECC started, took over as a successor rather of the Police Integrity Commission, which was established in turn by the Wood-Royal Commission, and that was nearly basically 30 years ago this year that commission started, and we still operate out of the same building. So we feel that history and that sense of purpose very strongly. I had the great pleasure the other night to listen to former High Court Justice Virginia Bell AC, reflecting on her days as a counsel assisting in the Wood Royal Commission, and an extraordinary woman, and can I say, the least interesting thing she's ever done is being a High Court judge, and I think that tells you a bit about her career. But one of the things that she was talking about was some of the stories that came out of the Wood Royal Commission, and I guess this is what happens when you don't have a speak-up culture. The degree of corruption in the police force has been well documented, and there's some spectacular videos of people literally taking brown paper bags of cash in King's Cross, etc. But Ms. Bell was talking about an example that she was aware of, which I hadn't heard of previously, of a police sergeant at his police desk cutting up a kilo of heroin, ready to repurpose it. But the spectacular bit was he didn't even bother to shut the door because he was so confident that no one was going to dob on him. And I think, so that's what happens when you don't have a speak-up culture, rather, and the police have seen that in spades. We don't have that anymore, I think, I'm relieved to say, and I'm sure Assistant Commissioner Cotter is delighted. And some of the things that the Wood Royal Commission recommended in order to kind of change some of that thinking was, firstly, police retain responsibility for their own. So there was and there continues to be suggestions that all complaint management should be outsourced to another independent agency. And Justice Wood said police need to own the problem. It needs to be theirs, because then they are responsible for solving it, and they're responsible for dealing with their own and creating an appropriate response continuum to allegations of misconduct or poor behaviour. The other thing that Justice Wood recommended, which I think is significant, and a lot of this has resonance in the current PID model under the current PID Act, is to move away from an adversarial model towards a remedial and a managerial model, so that, as Mr. Cotter said, the majority of complaints don't require someone to be sacked. They might, perhaps the majority, require training, advice, suggestions, supervision, those kinds of things. So, because ultimately we want good police, but we do need police. We need them to be employed, present, and doing their job well. So that kind of remedial culture, it also means that if you report someone's conduct, you know that there's not going to be a heavy fist necessarily descend upon them, but if it's a correction, then that correction will be implemented. And I think the third pillar of the sort of framework that Justice Wood recommended is to have an external agency monitoring it. And that's again the same with the new PID Act and developing that speak-up culture. And it does give people trust within the agency that when they report misconduct, there is someone outside of the agency that's overseeing the way in which that misconduct is being handled. And I think that helps to build an integrity within the agency that's handling it, and gives the complainants or the people raising concerns a sense of trust and confidence. Mr. Cotter's talked a bit about how that unfolds in the police force. More than happy to chat a bit more about the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission's role in that. What I wanted to also reflect on, I suppose, is another much more recent matter that the Commission's been involved in that also concerned a speak-up culture. And this was the Commission's Operation Harrisdale report tabled a couple of weeks ago. So for those of you that don't follow these things as closely as I do, it involved a police officer who had crashed his car, whilst off duty but driving a police car in a tunnel in Sydney, and there were allegations made that he'd been driving whilst under the influence of alcohol. So that report came through to the Commission, and the Commission saw that the police were conducting the kind of investigation of that offence that anyone else would be you'd expect it to be conducted for anyone else that crashed their car, and there's a suspicion that they were drinking beforehand. So we looked at it, ticked it off, that's fine, the police have got this, safe hands, no issue. We then received an anonymous complaint, and this is all in our public report, so there's no issues there. We received an anonymous complaint that said there are concerns that because of the rank and connections of this officer, that there are attempts to interfere with the investigation. Now that's quite a different thing, and that caused the Commission, again in its using two different sets of powers, to oversee the way in which that investigation was being undertaken, and also to subsequently to actually turn it into investigation, where we were able to bring in about 17, 18 witnesses and take their evidence. We do take evidence almost always in private, and we take it confidentially, partly for some of the reasons Mr. Cotter was talking about, because then we can lock down discussions of things. We don't unnecessarily expose people as being either a complainant or even just a witness to the conduct of their colleagues. And in the most robust speak-up culture, it's still very difficult to say, I had to come in and talk about the things that we did together and the things that where I disagreed with your processes. So that had a couple of key outcomes. I think the most significant for this conversation are that some of the criticisms that the Commission made of the way in which the matter was handled was not the actual investigation of the alleged drunk driving. That's still before the courts, and that was, we said, well handled. Our concerns were the ones Mr. Cotter's raised, which is that this officer did not get treated in the same way as other officers would have been treated. That was one of the things that we think, reading between the lines, prompted the complaint to come to the Commission, and it was certainly the concerns that witnesses raised with us when they gave evidence before the Commission. So, as Mr. Cotter said, consistency of response to complainants and proper outcomes where complaints are made, those things are fundamental to really building a culture, of a speak-up culture, and I think that applies across the board and not just to policing. I'd just say before we turn to questions, I think the challenge is in any complaint handling process, and that could include sort of something on the end of grievances, sometimes conduct is not visible to people outside. So if it's a question of in putting extra supervision in around someone, or having a discussion about proper processes, or reminding people about conflict of interest policies and the importance of them declaring any conflicts of interest that they have and how they do it. Some of those discussions are properly done privately between a manager and the person involved. And so the complainant may not see that there have been consequences. So there's a real challenge there in letting the complainant know that they've been heard, that what they've said has been taken seriously, it's been respected and it's been dealt with, whilst not breaching the privacy of the person about whom the complaint was made, particularly if you're trying to foster a kind of managerial response where appropriate. So, my early reflections, Louise, over to you.
Thank you. So, I think you mentioned that there's a decentralised model, and that obviously you talked about the role of the Professional Standards Command, and that the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission has access to, for example, the misconduct matter system, and they can look at the complaints received, etc. I think it'd be really interesting to understand the interaction between misconduct matters being received through the police force and looked at by the Professional Standards Command, what that triage process looks like, but also then the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission's response to that, because obviously you must have access to those matters as well and determine whether or not you might use your powers. So just a little bit about that for the audience. Let's start with you.
Well, of course, the triage process is managed in every command by an inspector of police who holds the professional standards portfolio along with their superintendent commander, and they meet regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes once a month, depending on what the work is, and have what's called a complaints management team process where the matter will be discussed at length with a number of panel members, senior members of that area, being the commander, superintendent, as I said, a couple of inspectors, being a HR inspector, professional standards inspector, who will bring the matter to that table, and in other cases, the senior business manager and so forth. And the matter will be pulled apart and dissected into the issues that are raised, understanding that some complaints can be 3 lines, some complaints can be 30 pages. And sometimes there's a lot of words without a lot of substance either. So their job is a very important one, but as I said, to set that culture and that confidence that the job is being done right at the triage process. So sometimes matters are what we would say triaged out, as in there is no substance to the letter, to the complaint, or it's already been dealt with previously. This is the third, tending to get into even that vexatious type of world. Sometimes it's from an anonymous complainant who might give you 3 lines, but without the ability to fully explore what that person knows, you've got to make a decision with what you've got. But then you've got to balance that with, well, have you got that same complaint three or 4 months in a row? Does it correlate with something that you heard 3 years ago that's in your, in your indices? And then you look at perhaps the person complained about's complaint history and go, well, this is a little bit of smoke and we haven't got quite the trigger to pull it into an investigation, but I look at the person's history and it's the same thing 2 years ago, and anonymous complaint, but triaged out. There comes a threshold where you've got to go, can everyone have it wrong or can everyone have it right? I don't know. But you've got to also, you don't go on witch hunts either. You've got to be fair with what's like any assessment body would. So everything's on its merits. There's no absolute exact formula. And of course, we have 80 or 90 superintendents out there who, again, all very experienced police commanders, but this type of stuff may be not their bread and butter. They might not have come through the investigative stream of the organisation. Everyone doesn't have the legal background or the experience in investigating internal complaints. So again, their work is then checked and balanced by the region commander, the assistant commissioner, who also chairs a complaints management team at the region level, looking at all their commands. And in a previous role, for example, looking after the southern region of New South Wales, all of the southern region, for example, Sydney to the border, across almost to the other border, I had 8 police districts in that, so 8 superintendents, so 8 separate panels sitting under mine, which I'd chair every month. And we would review and check and balance whether they got some of their decision making right. Clearly everything is locked and loaded onto the IA Pro system, the misconduct management database, of which full optics are observed by the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission. And then, as I said, they can pick and choose if it's in a theme of other complaints or something that absolutely meets their criteria, which is generally significant and sensitive, public interest, all those obvious ones, but generally the gravity of the issue would attract them.
So how our complaints management system works is we get complaints in from 2 streams. So as Peter said, we have visibility over the complaints management database that the police have, so they all get ingested into our organisation, and we review the way in which the police have handled those complaints. So we can review whether they've the complaint, the triage. We can access anything that was used in the triage, so the body-worn video, look at any of the police statements that have been taken, the cops entries, so the sort of police running database on what they do. It's a nice way of calling cops. So we can look at all of that, and we do. And we make sure that the triage has been done correctly identified the issues, and that we're generally satisfied with the decision. Sometimes we might, it's one of those ones where we'd agree to disagree, but most of the time, we look at whether we're generally satisfied. If the police have decided they don't want to investigate a matter and we think they should, we can require the police to investigate it, or we can ask them to look at a couple of other allegations. So they might have looked at whether use of force was properly used, but they didn't look at whether someone's body-worn video camera was turned on, and we asked that. Because some of that is good, that good record keeping and that data management sounds very pedantic and bureaucratic, but it's the stuff that you're missing that is so valuable and informs training and identification of risk and those things for in the future. The other avenue by which we get complaints is from the public, and again we look at those and do a preliminary assessment most of the time, and literally 99% of the time we'll send them to police to at least do a first triage to have a look at, and then again we'll go through that review process to see if we agree with the police triage of the matter and whether we think that they've handled it properly in their proposed course of action. But we have a couple of other opportunities to dive in there. So when we get a complaint, either through the police or from the public, we can say, okay, stop, that's ours, we're going to take it and we're going to investigate it. And we investigate about 1% of matters, not always at that stage, but sometimes if it's of a level of seriousness that it ought not to go back to police, or the person involved is sufficiently senior, or for a range of other matters, other reasons we might decide that we want to investigate it. We can also live monitor the way in which police are investigating a particular matter, and that's what happened in Harrisdale. So we didn't wait for the police investigation to end, and this is again documented in our report there. We were watching to see what documents were added into the police investigation system, and when things were being missed, and we thought they were being missed, we asked questions. Have you done this? Have you held a safe driver panel yet? Can you tell us the outcome? Oh no, we're just about to do one. So we were able to watch, track how things were going, ask questions and get responses on the way through. So that's another way of pushing and guiding. Very labour intensive, so we don't do it all the time. We pick the matters for that. The other way in which we have an involvement in the complaints process is when police have investigated a matter, we are given a copy of the investigation outcome and the investigation report. So we're able to, and we do, go through and review all of those. Some get a fairly quick review and some get an in-depth review, and again there are opportunities there for us to say this wasn't properly investigated, we think it needs to go back on. Even at that stage we can pick it up and take it over ourselves, and an example of that is a recent matter called Operation Tambray, which involved a police officer who had made a statement about a phone call that he'd received where he made he incorrectly documented a threat having been made to him, and someone was picked up and put in custody for several weeks as a result. That person had actually made a recording on their phone of the phone call, and the threat wasn't there. We didn't think police handled that well. We gave police a chance to investigate it. We weren't satisfied with the investigation, and so we picked it up and did it ourselves, and that matter ended up in criminal proceedings. So there's a couple of different points at which we review and check the way in which police have handled things, and which we can jump in and investigate ourselves if necessary. I should say, the vast majority of the time, we're comfortable with the way police handle things, and that's as it should be. So it should be enough that there's a nudge. You shouldn't need the investigation from the LECC. But it's there if it's needed.
Yeah, so lots of checks and balances between both approaches to ensure that there's that consistency of process and outcome.
Yeah. I might just jump in and say the other thing that we do, and I think this is probably particular to the LECC and perhaps maybe doesn't happen so much in a general PID context, is we have regular meetings with Professional Standards Command, and so there's a lot of checking to see, have you got this, what have you thought about that, what's happening here. So we have the formal structures, but we also have some good informal working relationships.
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions that have come through. This one's for you, Mr. Cotter, I think. This is about police having a duty to report, and I think the reference is probably to the Police Act. Do you identify circumstances where officers have not fulfilled their duty to report, and if so, how are those situations dealt with?
Yeah, yep. Quite often people fail in that obligation. Whether that's, in some cases, ironically, they're unaware of their obligation, literally unaware of their legal obligation. And that is legitimate and genuine in some cases. In other cases, they're obviously aware of it, but through whatever means, whether it be a culture, whether it be he's my colleague, he's my friend, whatever the case is, I'm talking he's, but equally it is got applicable, has applicability to females as well in our organisation, understanding that we have, 35%, a female workforce. Understanding that we recruit people almost out of school. I mean, I joined straight from school, but there are people 19, and there's mature 19-year-olds, and there's 19-year-olds who are not quite so mature with all of this stuff, and have come from, again, equally, whilst we police 800,000 square kilometres, our recruits come from 800,000 square kilometres too. So different backgrounds and cultures around all of this as well. So it's not just a police culture thing. Sometimes it's a cultural culture, or perhaps, I dare say, even as history would dictate, an Australian culture, perhaps not to report anything of a misgiving nature. What can happen to them? They can be equally investigated and penalties can be delivered. If they turn a blind eye, a willful blind eye to misconduct and don't report it, yeah, they will be investigated and there will be sanctions that flow. Yep.
I might add in that's one of the things we look at in our triaging process. Yeah. So if something's happened, either there's been inappropriate postings on WhatsApp, or there's been poor policing, clear unlawful use of force, for example, in the context of a police action, and that's captured on body worn, and you can see that there are other officers around who have seen it, and some of whom say, your body worn's on. Yeah. So that's something that we make sure is part of the police investigation, and part of the allegation that goes back to police to investigate is the failure to report. Yeah. And I think, again, that's a really important thing, that you need to both the positive, the carrot, the incentives, the warm fuzzies when people do the right thing, and the disincentives when they don't.
And I guess you would consider their years of experience and the circumstances in which it occurred, and whether there was a genuine misunderstanding of their obligation.
That's right.
Or not.
Some people genuinely, but the question is, was the question asked? And that's really important from our point of view.
There's another really differentiation here between policing and just about every other occupation. If you work for the Commonwealth Bank or any other bank, and you go out and you play up tonight in a social context, and you maybe consume drugs in the toilet, or you do whatever you do, I'm not sure the Commonwealth Bank have an obligation, if you work with your work colleague, that you've got to come in and report it the next day. Whereas we have this 24/7 issue, on duty, off duty. Now that is, in reality, that is burdensome, but it's also something totally very different to a brand new police officer. And quite often you get, I knew about an obligation to report misconduct. I thought that was only between 9 to 5. I thought it was only when we were on shift. Again, that's not a culture, that's an absolute awakening and awareness to the responsibility of your oath of office and our code of conducts and our statement of values, which are very core to all of our culture. They're the pillars of it. So we are a different job, again, with different expectations up here, that I must say that many other professions in society don't have to meet on and off duty.
Absolutely, it's not just a job.
That's a lifestyle.
That's right. And I think we had a question here, which I think we've kind of covered, but Anina, you spoke about the conflict between a police culture and a speak-up culture at the beginning. I guess the question is, what is being done to align the two? And if there were any other further remarks.
I think it's really challenging for all the reasons that we've already kind of covered, and it's not a challenge that's unique to New South Wales or Australia. We've seen Baroness Casey putting together a really persuasive and powerful report about the culture in the London Met and the impact that institutional problems of racism, sexism and homophobia have had on their culture. But I think the fundamentals is changing the conversation. It's a slow burn, but the conversation needs to be, you want the public to trust you. You deserve to be in a job where you are trusted. Most of the time the public does trust the police, but that's built and it's earned, and it's the price is eternal vigilance, to coin a phrase. And so that trust needs to continue to be built, and that means speaking up when you see things that aren't wrong, so that you know that your colleagues and the people that you are standing beside and you are working with will also be trusted and will be doing the right thing. And I think, and this is the difficulty, is making sure that people don't suffer any detrimental action, not just the failure to get promotion and those kinds of things, but the practical day-to-day lived experience in the station meal room, at roster. Are you still invited out for drinks because you spoke up? And that's hard yakka, and it's something that comes from leadership, but that needs to come all the way down the station. But I think it can be done. It's been done. The police had a terrible reputation for the way in which they treated, the LGBTQI+ community, for example, and I think that's improved significantly. So, and to the extent that police are, now a great employer from that community. So I think these things can change. It takes time, and it's an organisation of 20,000+ individuals. So.
Which leads me into probably our last question. And we talked about, I guess, the daunting nature of coming forward and the risk of detrimental action or reprisal. Do we have any advice, I guess, for people who might be thinking about coming forward, and also advice for supervisors and managers about managing the risk of detrimental action in a work environment?
Well, again, along with the theme of, if you see it, speak to it. Don't hold it within, because that can make you even perhaps more, that can make you complicit in it. So that's a very clear, obvious first point, I think. But the second thing, it is your duty. It is your duty to live by the statement of values, because they're pretty core to who we are and gaining and keeping that public trust. And I lived through the Police Royal Commission as a young investigator, and of course, if you look now, our youngest recruit, or even our recruits, even our police officers in their early 20s, were not even born when the Royal Commission. So it's like talking about World War II or the Civil War in America. It's in the annals of history. So there's always going to be the next generation, unfortunately, who think they might have invented some type of misconduct. It's our job as very experienced hands to understand the early flags of what can lead to misbehaviour, and that is sometimes with declarables, with people who are not the members that they should be hanging around with. And of course, historically it might have been from police hanging around with people in pubs. That might not happen so much, but they might see them at the barber shop or the gym or the tattoo parlour. So, you know, understanding that sort of different moving and shaking that police do in their spare time, in their off time. But that can't cloud their roles and responsibilities and duties to be of good conduct on and off duty. So their duty is to report it, but go into it equally with eyes wide open that it's not a tip and run business. The reality is that you are in it, and depending on the gravity of the conduct that you're reporting, misconduct you're reporting, it might go for years and it might end up in a criminal court, and you will have to give evidence. But again, that's the maturity and the leadership that's got to come around, and the protection that we owe that person. If we're going to say to you as an organisation, speak up, then it's our job to protect you through that journey. And for the supervisors, well, their job is to put that initial shield around that person and protect them and keep it as confidential, but equally report it up and make sure that they treat the person with the confidence, make them feel comfortable in what they've done, but also take it forward to their leaders in turn.
Absolutely. I'd add only, there is always the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, so you can report externally if you don't feel comfortable reporting internally. You can tell us you don't want things to be referred to police, although that does make it difficult. You can report anonymously if you need to and still provide a good deal of information. I appreciate that providing sufficient information to allow something to be investigated while staying anonymous can be a tight line to walk. But fundamentally, doing this is of value. If you want to be someone in the public service who is part of a public service of integrity, that requires all of us to act out that value and that belief. And I think it is very incumbent on supervisors, on immediate supervisors, to stomp on the nonsense in the meal room, to stomp on the ostracisation, and to really show a positive culture of support for people that speak up, even if they're, regardless of what happens to their complaint, because the fact of the matter is, to be a part of that organisation, you've got to commend people, visually commend people for taking positive steps, and I think that's fundamental.
Definitely. Right. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate that. And
Louise,
thank you. Our pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you
Excellent.
for listening.
Thank you. And thank you for those of us who've joined us online.